I finally got around to watching Sinners now that it's actually on streamers and everything like that. And before I get into any of my actual thoughts on the film as a whole, I do want to say that I thoroughly am enjoying over the last couple of years the sort of floodgates that Jordan Peele has opened. He was obviously not the first person to do this, but I am loving the sort of like black horror thriller genre that is happening over the last like decade or so. And I'll get much more into this later in the video, but it is becoming one of my favorite genres of film, I have to say. So if anyone knows any movies that fit into that category, whether old or new, I would love for you to comment and tell me about them so I can check them out. With that being said, this video is going to be two parts. There's going to be a no spoiler part at the beginning where I give spoiler free thoughts and opinions and a final rating based on 5 different categories: mise en scene, performance, cinematography, editing, and sound. I will give a rating based on 1 through 5 for each category and give my thoughts in each category. And then the second half of the video will have some sort of spoilers. I'll give a warning, but ultimately if you watch past that point, that's on you. Anyway, with that being said, I'll get started. First off, mise en scene. The mise en scene in Sinners is phenomenal. Every frame conveys a multi-layered message in Sinners. And I know I say in every piece of media, especially movies, everything is intentional, so you should read it as something that was thought out meticulously. But in Sinners, it feels like almost a masterclass in that being true when it comes to mise en scene. Like the entire movie takes place over the course of a day in the Delta, which obviously has a massive significance with blues and obviously slavery, of course. If we are to take a step back from those connotations and just look at it objectively, a lot of the scenes in the movie are absolutely beautiful, like these dirt roads with fields and fields of cotton, that it feels insanely immersive. Every scene in this movie always feels like you were being absolutely transplanted to this time period, which as a black person, I don't want to be in that time period regardless, but in a safe way, you know what I mean? Like it feels comforting, like you feel connected. At least as a black person, I felt so connected to this part of American history and black culture simply based on every scene. Like even if you watch the movie completely silent with no music, it feels absolutely transcendent. So just simply based on how well it's done and the connection I feel to it, and maybe in a lot of ways that's my own bias, but who cares, this is my channel, I'm gonna give Sinners a 4. Easy 4 for Sinners as far as like mise en scene goes. Performance, next level, transcendent. I think I'm going to be using the word transcendent a lot when it comes to Sinners as far as every single category goes. If I remember correctly, the actor who plays Sammy, Michael Caton, I believe is his name, learned guitar for this role. And when you have an actor who is that dedicated to a role, it is difficult to make a bad movie, I think, in my opinion. That's just a level of passion and dedication to the craft of acting that can almost even transcend the movie in a lot of ways, that it makes it difficult to make a bad piece of media, honestly. Michael B. Jordan does a great job making Stack and Smoke feel like 2 very different characters, which is of course insanely difficult, from body language, the way they talk, the way they present themselves, how they interact with each other character, blah blah blah, to make that convincing that it's not just like Michael B. Jordan or just like the same character over and over is a challenge. But he is a seasoned actor, so he was definitely up to snuff for this. And you of course have a couple other seasoned actors in the movie as well, but even those who I'm not quite familiar with, they still did a great job at standing their ground. Every actor in this film, it didn't feel like they were lacking behind or trying to catch up with Michael B. Jordan. It felt like every scene they were on equal playing field, and they all did a phenomenal job. Like with Sammy alone, to be able to keep up is impressive. I'm not quite aware of his accolades, but just based on this movie alone, I can see a very lengthy and promising acting career in that young man's future. So as far as performance goes, this is an easy 4 for me. As far as cinematography goes, I touched on it earlier with like these beautiful dirt roads and fields that are very present in a lot of the scenes in the movie. And I think the ability ability to take something with such a horrific context for Black people and make it something beautiful is a skill within itself. A lot of the people in the movie are plantation workers, just hard-working people who live in basically shacks and are just trying to make it. And to take that pain and be able to transform it and make it into something that is visually beautiful but doesn't denigrate or make these people otherized and less than is so well done. Like, for example, in a lot of YouTube videos, you will see white people go to the hood or whatever and sort of showcase poverty, but especially Black and brown people, as these sort of almost zoo animals that don't know how to interact or don't deserve dignity. And that's absolutely disgusting, and I hate that type of content, but that's a different video. My major point being, there is a way to show people struggle financially and also give them dignity. And I feel like, yes, even though this is a fictional film, the cinematography in this is done in a way that gives everybody dignity and Black struggle dignity, but also pride that, like, this is where you come from. Look at how we've persevered. This is where we came from, and there is pride in that, all the while still being a thriller film. So all the action shots are filmed beautifully. The scary scenes are incredibly scary and menacing, and you know, the villains feel like overwhelming, and they are bigger than you can ever comprehend, and that's all done just through the cinematography. So another 4 for Sinners as far as like cinematography goes. As far as editing goes, the entire movie of Sinners takes place over the course of a day, and I think to be able to tell a story like that and it not feel like you're just shoving so much information at us or like it feels overwhelming is done in a really good way, and a lot of that is editing. I mean, story pacing as well, but like the editing in the movie is done right, because again, it takes place the entire movie over the course of an entire day, which is such a short period of time to have so much action and motives and to jam pack so much into just 24 hours as far as a plot goes isn't easy. So the fact that like the story didn't feel jumbled or, you know, it jumped sporadically and it was all still somehow cohesive is a testament to how good the editing is. So it's definitely a 4 for me as well, which I think you may be noticing a pattern. As far as sound goes, I think it's another 4. Because it is a thriller, it is often tense, it is often menacing, but very often, especially because of the music, it is uplifting. It is serene, it is calming, and to be able to balance and walk that tightrope of having a thriller have so many kind, genuine scenes is a testament to how good the sound is, because there's often such softness in the movie that like you often forget that it's not an overall story of not just Black struggle, but the struggle of the twins, but also not just their own struggle, but like all the characters around them, at least the main characters and their subtle meanings. And I think you are only able to tell such genuine and soft stories that are completely personal and feel personal for every character if you have good sound. You know, if the music is done right and like makes you feel these things emotionally and it still feel earned, you know what I mean? Like a lot of movies will force emotions on you, but they're very unearned. But every scene in Sinners has earned whatever emotion you feel, and you can tell by the end of it that it has worked hard for it. So once again, another 4. Sinners is overall a 4. I'm a little late to the review aspect of this movie, but I think if you found this video, you're probably asking yourself, is Sinners worth the hype? Is everyone just kind of blowing smoke out their ass about like how good this movie is? And I quite honestly, for whatever my opinion is worth, yeah, it's worth the hype. I left that movie thinking, wow, I wish this movie was longer, or that like there's prequels or sequels. I want more from this world. I'll even take comics, whatever you can give me, Ryan Coogler. Please give me something. I need more from this world. Maybe like a prequel showing like the twins growing up. I guess that is my one critique of the movie. Every time I learned something or anything about a character in a movie, I always left feeling like, okay, but give me a little bit more. hopefully like they touch on it a little bit more later on in the movie. And you know, they weren't able to. Like, that doesn't mean like the rest of the movie was bad, or like the fact that like there wasn't more backstory for characters takes away from anything. It is still a phenomenal film. I think it's great, and definitely when award season rolls around, it deserves a few at least. So to finally answer the question, is Sinners worth your time? Is it worth the hype? Absolutely. I think you should definitely go check it out. With that being said, that ends the no spoiler portion. This is your warning that beyond this point, I am going to give my unfiltered thoughts and opinions, and there may be a lot of spoilers beyond this point. One of the things I want to touch on, which was before I even saw the movie, was Grace and how much hatred she got. You could look at what Grace did, like sort of selling everybody out and letting the vampires in, as a betrayal. And it essentially was a betrayal. She had her own motivation. She was stressed out. She didn't think she would survive anyway. That's why the only vampire she actually killed was her husband, and that's only after they threatened her daughter, even though through her actions her daughter's now an orphan, but whatever. So that makes her, at least in of itself, a bit complex. Is it selfish? Yes, but I think we can take back the layers on that and extrapolate much more about Grace and the struggle that Asian Americans face in society, especially in contrast with Black Americans. At first I thought Grace was absolutely selfish, but after sitting with it for a bit, I think she tells a story of something a lot deeper. When we meet Grace and her husband greets Smoke with a sense of camaraderie, like a friend he hasn't seen in a long time. They were friendly. Her husband saw himself as a part of the community. He was on and running the store on the Black part of town, where the wife was on the white part of town. That in of itself tells a lot about kind of race relations when it comes to Black people and Asians. Unfortunately, Asian people in society are seen as sort of a model minority, and we could get into how that is damaging for everybody, not just, you know, Black and brown people, but also Asians in of itself. But that white supremacist notion allows a sort of proximity to whiteness, and whiteness is inherently just anti-Blackness. You know, that's why whiteness has only expanded. Grace, when she met the brothers, treated them as nothing more than like someone to do business with, essentially. Like, there wasn't a camaraderie like it was with the husband. And I think the deeper meaning behind those two very distinct and very different interactions is a commentary on the fact that you will have not just Asian people, but a lot of people of color in general who have a desire to have a place in society close to whiteness, even though they will simply just be used as a means regardless of what they do. Grace was essentially just used as a pawn to get to Sammy and get inside the juke joint, and she was essentially the first to die. I mean, through her own choice, but essentially she was used to harm Black people. And you could argue that her husband never would have done that, because he saw himself as a person of color and as a part of the community. From what we see briefly of the husband, he saw himself as very much a part of the community. He saw these people, Black people, as his neighbors and friends, whereas Grace saw them honestly no different than the white people, as just people to do business with. And unfortunately for her, they took advantage of that. Remick took advantage of the fact that she didn't necessarily see the people around her as any more than people to do business with. But inherently, that isn't even necessarily her fault, but ultimately she was just used as a pawn in a greater game. You see this very often, where you will have Asian people be in the face of anti-affirmative action measures and speaking engagements about how it's racist and ultimately hurts Asian people, etc., etc. But then when these anti-affirmative action measures are enacted, you realize they're not better off once these anti-Black measures are enacted. They were simply just used as mouthpieces for a more nefarious agenda. And it often, at least for me, me feels heartbreaking, because honestly, if there was more solidarity amongst people of color, we could do so much more to progress all of our lives, not just like with people of color, but in general. But that's a separate video. Ultimately, do I think what Grace did was wrong? I don't know. I think it's a lot more complicated than that, but I do find the undertones of what the movie is trying to say very interesting, much more interesting than a debate of is she right or is she wrong. Speaking of anti-blackness, the expansion of whiteness, etc., it is very intentional, and I'm not sure I've seen many people talk about it, but it is very intentional, the fact that Remic's character is Irish. And this is pointed out in many ways, one of the funnier ones being the fact that Remick, when asked is he a part of the KKK, took genuine offense. On some way, that is funny, but in a lot of ways, he's probably dead serious. Like, sure, he wants to, like, kill everyone in there, but it isn't on the basis of their blackness. But the more the movie goes on, we learn that the basis of Remick's character is on the basis of his otherization, not just as a vampire, but as an Irishman. You see this because there is a contrast during that sort of like big sort of song circle that he has before like the bigger attacks start to happen, and he's singing Irish folk songs, and at the end when he's talking to Sammy about the fact that there is a comfort in the scripture that Sammy is singing, but those are the scriptures that the people who harmed his family and took their land said to them before they did the horrific things that they did, the British. And this is coupled with the fact that Delta Slim talked about the importance of the blues, is how important song is to a culture and to a people, and it connects them to their ancestors. And at one point he says, they brought religion, they forced religion upon us, but we made the blues and that's ours and they can't take that from us. And that deeper messaging, you could talk about the fact that for a long time the Irish weren't considered white. Whiteness is an ever-expanding force to otherize black people. So for Remick, there's probably a big part of him who genuinely doesn't necessarily see himself as white in a contemporary sense of like being part of this group and being against black people. That's why he was willing and offered to kill the Grand Dragon or whatever near the end of the movie. And when he saw the clan robes, he knew immediately to sort of like appeal to his baser nature when he was running away from the vampire hunters, which is why I would love to see a story about Remick. And before you say anything, I get it. We have enough vampire movies where there's a sympathetic white lead. I get it. But during this time period, and as old as he is, because he had like straight up doubloons, so he's probably a very old vampire, there was a lot there that could be said that transcends whiteness in an American contemporary sense of like them against us kind of thing. Because Remick is Irish. A random beat cop in Boston is a white dude. And that is a significant difference, especially when it comes to storytelling and a part of Remick's overall identity. Because for Remick, it isn't anti-blackness that he is hurting black people. It is almost as a direct result of his otherization in society. Not only is just an Irishman, but as a vampire, etc., etc. So he is seeking a form of community. He wants community. Like, yes, like the overall plot is about he wants Sammy, because he's a Greedo, I'm probably butchered that, and he wants to see like people who have died, probably his wife who died earlier in the film, his family back in Ireland, etc., etc. He wants community, essentially. And in a lot of ways, he sees these people in the juke joint having that, and maybe he feels a sense of loneliness in a way. But again, I just think it is interesting, Remick as a character, because if you look at it at a surface level, it's just like, ooh, bad vampire, like he's directly antagonistic to the black leads. But it's a lot deeper than that, because everything in movies is very much intentional. And that is something that I love, that like the through line for the entire movie is doing your best to survive in the face of oppression. You know, you had like Remick talking about like Christianity, and like Delta Slim talking about Christianity, and like that's a very thing that comes up in conversations and stuff like that, is that like, and I'm not a Christian by any stretch of the definition, I'm agnostic, but like my personal feelings is that like, if it brings somebody comfort, there's no harm in it, you know what I mean, as long as they're not hurting anybody else or trying to tell anybody else how to live. I think that there is an actual intelligent and thought-provoking conversation that can be had about Christianity, whiteness, and the historical oppression it has brought upon black people. I mean, people in general around the world, but specifically black people, because we're talking about sinners. You know, like this weapon to be used in a lot of ways against black people, like essentially this sort of weapon of peace and kindness, and you need to treat others with respect, blah blah blah. And sure, like those are ideals that should be celebrated, and like everyone should live their life that way. But the contrast of like, historically speaking, when missionaries brought a Bible, the people with guns weren't very far behind. There is something, and even if it wasn't necessarily a violent sort of bringing of Christianity, which I can't necessarily think any off the top of my head where it wasn't, there was a destruction of a culture. You know what I mean? It was an assimilation, and it was never a gentle assimilation. And I'm not smart enough or intelligent enough to talk about Christianity in the context of like historics or whatever. I do think that it is like an interesting conversation to have that like is prevalent throughout the entire story of Sinners, especially in the context of like Sammy's father being a preacher who denounces these other groups of people as essentially sinners, when ultimately they're just as black as he is, they're just as impoverished as he is, they're just trying to get by just as much as he is as well. Sammy's father is essentially just a mouthpiece for this thing that is used to denigrate and oppress his people further. Sammy's father is an example of essentially black people upholding their own oppression in a lot of ways, because white supremacy is so pervasive. Because ultimately those people at the juke joint are just hardworking people who want to drink and want to dance and feel alive for a moment, you know, when the sun goes down after working in the fields. What's essentially wrong with that? Christianity is promising, after oppressing them, promising them this sort of happiness and holiness and paradise at the end of their lives. But what about right now when things are so hard and difficult? And I really like that Smoke and Stack are presented as these hardened criminals who are just bad, evil people. But throughout the entire story, we see them do nothing if not try to help their community in a lot of ways. Sure, like they're trying to do it from this sort of like black capitalist aspect of like, oh, I mean, we're going to get ours first, or we're going to try to get ours as best as they can. And even then, they're not great at it, but they approach it from like, at least we're trying to get ours. And sure, it would be nice to help some people along the way. Like, for example, when they're talking to that little girl and he's like, watch my truck for me. And he tells her to essentially negotiate. Also, just as a side note, I love how much money they're throwing around, but I think it also teaches subliminally something that's very important. One, that people should know their worth, you know, that especially black people, but especially little black girls. Everyone should know that they're worth more than what they're given. And I think that's a very subtle and beautiful thing to sort of like implement into the movie. Also love Smoke and Stack's relationship, like especially in that last scene as he's dying and like, because I'm sorry, I mixed their names up, but like as Smoke is dying, Stack is like, you were the best parts of me. And you don't see, one, the only time that they really showed that kind of softness was with the women they love and with their brother. And I think that is a beautiful thing. One, because black men are presented as these hardened criminals who feel no emotion, who can't show any compassion, blah, blah, blah. And I think it is beautiful to just sort of have this movie show men, especially black men, as like these soft, gentle creatures who can have emotions. I don't know, I just think it's good to show that black people, just especially black men, aren't these hardened thugs, that they're humans capable of emotion, as silly as that sounds. I think I just love Smoke and Stack a lot because even though they were portrayed as these like hardened criminals and men to be feared, they did their best to help in the best way that they knew how. You know what I mean? Anyway, I think a good place to end it on is, I love the imagery of this entire film and the emotions that it conveys. And I was telling someone that it is nice to just see people who look like you in a movie, even in a fantastic, vampiric, magic-filled world. It is just cool because people of color, since forever, have had to remove aspects and part of themselves to see themselves as the main character or relate in some way to white leads. But it is a lot easier to put yourself in the position of the main character when they look like you. It's something we've had to do for ages. We're in a space that like it is a lot more prevalent and possible for people of color to make our own films with us, starring us and stuff like that. It is just nice, and it makes me emotional because even there was a scene in a movie where one of the brothers was about to get bit by cornbread, and I genuinely found that a lot more scary than I would, I have to say, if it was a white lead, because I could see myself and I could see people I'm in contact with in the character. But I digress. I hope you enjoyed my commentary, or hopefully found me at least mildly entertaining. Thank you for watching. I hope you like or subscribe if anything resonated with you. If not, share it with your friends and you can all talk about how terrible my commentary is. Either way, I need the views. Anyway, thanks for watching. Peace.